Yeah. Mr. Chair, we can make sure everyone has their mics on, please. And we're ready to go whenever you're ready.
Oh, no, we want them.
Good evening, this is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Warren Planning Board, Monday, September 28th, 7 p.m. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the governor signed an executive order allowing teleconference. All those concerned to participate in the meeting may join by using provided regarding Zoom.
Fire.
As noted in before the meeting, any member of the public wishing to attend in person must have a reservation to attend into us no later than 4 p.m. on the 25th of September. And so I would assume that anybody who's here has a reservation. We do have a quorum. All are present, and there's no absences. There is no waterfront overlay district development plan review, and the first and only order of business is the public hearing, which is for the comprehensive permit application, master plan stage 1820, lot 16, 159, 164, located on Kennicott Avenue and Denver Avenue. The applicant and owner is Last Ever Realty LLC. We'll start the meeting with a review by Town Planner Bob Cooley of where we stand now, in addition to the findings of the preliminary review committee. We will then ask the applicant for a presentation. Following the applicant's presentation, the board will ask questions regarding the information proposed if there's a need for clarification. After that, we will open up the matter to a public hearing, hear comment from the public. After we've heard comment from the public, we will close the meeting as a public hearing, and then the planning board will make a determination as to the future of the applicant's proposal. So when we do come to the public comment period, folks will be given 3 minutes to make a presentation. We ask that you, if you are presenting evidence, and I'll repeat this later on, that it be relevant to the findings that the planning board has before us. For example, I don't like the fact that there's development going in across the street is not going to be relevant and not helpful in terms of how we can judge the efficacy of the application. So, and if someone says before you something that you were going to say, I believe the best way to do it is to say, I agree with the speaker who said whatever it is that they said in reference to the application. So we'll move now to Mr. Woolley, who will review the findings of PRC and our status up on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The preliminary review committee met twice with the applicant. At both meetings, we listed a number of concerns that the town had and what the PRC had, and a request for additional documents. Some of those were provided, some of them were not. At the conclusion of the PRC, the committee felt that they did not have sufficient information in order to make a recommendation in favor or against the project, and requested that it be forwarded to the planning board, which is why we are here tonight. Before I go through the list of outstanding items that the concerns that the PRC had and the town has right now, I would like to just go through the list of requested waivers that the applicant is looking for. And at this point, there are 14 of them. The first one is a waiver from Article 8 of the Town of Warren zoning ordinance, Section 3247, to permit multifamily development in an R40 zone, and corresponding density waiver from the requirements of an R40. The second waiver is from Article 13 of the Town of Warren zoning ordinance, Section 3277, to exceed 35 feet maximum height for structures in an R40 zone. The third waiver is a waiver from Article 18 of the Warren zoning ordinance, Section 32106A, requiring a minimum of 1 island for each 8 parking spaces. They are also, number 4 is a waiver from Section 32141B, which is a Kickamila Reservoir Watershed Overlay District, to allow greater than 15% lot coverage of impervious material. As proposed, the application is for 29.3% of impervious surface area in a watershed overlay district. The fifth waiver is for the Town of Warren Planning Board Land Development Regulations, Section 3-2 streets, Section A, subparagraph 7, Section 310 trees, requiring street trees along street pavement. They are looking to not include those. Number 6 is a waiver from the Planning Board Land Development Regulations, Section 3-2 streets, Section D, subparagraph 2, a maximum grade of 1% for a distance of 30 feet from the intersection of a residential street. Number 7 is a waiver from the Planning Board Land Development Regulations, Section 3-2 streets, Section I, subparagraph 1, to permit a bituminous Cape Cod berm versus street curbing. Number 8 is a waiver from item A9 of the major subdivision land development application for residential subdivisions, an alternate cluster development plan showing the same number of house lots as proposed for a conventional subdivision. The applicant is also asking for a waiver of item 829 relating to permanent bounds to the preliminary plan stage. The 10th waiver is a waiver of any requirement for consent of landowners and the applicant to subdivide or develop the subject property by reason of any fact or circumstances involving previous or prior subdivision or land development. For those of you that don't know, the original 4 lots that the applicant had subdivision approval for, they made a representation at that time that they would not subdivide the land further with the consent of the 4 property owners or presumed 4 property owners. Subsequently, they have not sold those lots, and that is why they're asking for this waiver. Number 11 is a waiver of any local regulation necessary to permit development on the proposed project as shown on the project plans. Number 12 is a waiver of any purported requirement of the master plan or preliminary plan checklist that exceeds requirements applicable to those stages of review under the Act and/or Subdivision and Land Development Act, including but not limited to Rhode Island General Law, Section 452340, including any local approval by any agency or body other than the planning board, and any state or federal authority until the final approval stage, including public sewer approval deferral until the preliminary plan and final approval stage. They are also asking for a waiver to permit 24 feet front yardage building setback, typical subdivision lot 5 through 14, and existing lots 581, 584 Denver Ave. 35 feet is the requirement in R10 zone. They're also asking for a waiver to not have to include sidewalks along Kennecott Avenue or Denver Avenue. Those are waivers they are requesting. That in no means means that the town is requiring or going to approve those waivers. With respect to the outcome of the PRC, under the master plan checklist requirements, we still don't feel there is a narrative providing technical justification that the development will not impact noise, air pollution, views, shadows, etc., in accordance with Article 5 Special Use Permit, Section 3231A of the Warren zoning ordinance. We also feel that we need additional information with respect to soil evaluation and groundwater supply data. With respect to the waiver of the Kickamila Reservoir Watershed Overlay District, all requirements of that ordinance, Section 32134, are applicable. The applicant is requesting waiver of the maximum impervious surface lot coverage requirement of 50%. The town's position is that this is an environmental control. It cannot be waived as part of the comprehensive permit application, and it's not discretionary. It should be noted that the Kickapoo Reservoir is regulated by total maximum daily load, which is applicable to the Federal Clean Water Act, which requires phosphorus mitigation. The town is the holder of the Rhode Island DEM MS4 permit, and it's the town's obligation to control the potential for further water quality degradation and to maintain the watershed limits. The applicant's position in the PRC is that Bristol County Water Authority does not use the reservoir for drinking water anymore, but notwithstanding that fact, the watershed overlay ordinance still exists, and the public still has access to those public waters. With respect to sanitary sewer, the applicant has provided flow projections. We have issues with those flow projections. Based on the guidance that we've got from DEM as of Friday, the average daily flow has to be computed at a minimum of 300 gallons per day. The applicant, based on water supply information from Bristol County Water, is suggesting that it's 150 gallons or lower. The guidance that we've received from DEM is that if it's 295, you still use 300. If it's 100, you use 300. If it's 325, you use 325. Our concern is that as we identified during the preliminary review committee, the sewer line that comes up Patterson comes into Metacom and hits a pipe that's 15 inches. So it's been determined by Woodard and Curran that the maximum flow that that pipe can handle right now is 1,400 gallons per minute. The flow projections, if we use the 300 gallons per minute or per day that DM requires, that we would be exceeding the capacity of that sewer line. With respect to the hydraulic analysis report, we just received that today. However, the fire chief still has some concerns that even though the Bristol County Water says the flow and pressure is sufficient, without knowing the exact size of the buildings, what type of buildings they are, the fire chief is suggesting that a minimum of 1,500 to 2,000 gallons per minute for 2 hours is required for fire safety. There has been no identification to date as to what type of building types these are. Nothing has been provided with respect to exterior finished materials. Lastly, there was a traffic study provided by the applicant. In reviewing that with the police department, they find those conclusions for the report that was prepared by the applicant to be somewhat light in terms of what the impacts are. So going into this, I wanted the applicant to, once again, be aware of what the concerns the town has. I want the residents that are participating in this meeting virtually or here to understand what the concerns that the town has. And I will yield to Mr. Massey to allow the applicant to begin their presentation.
Mr. Landry, or who's representing?
Mr. Landry is remote. And you're muted, Mr. Landry.
Can you hear me okay?
Hear you.
I'm not sure if the members of the public had the same issue, but it was difficult to hear Mr. Massey and Mr. Rulli at times, particularly Mr. Massey. Mr. Rulli came through a little more clearly. I don't know if there's some way to maybe increase the volume. It sounded very distant, and I think at least on my feed, it was very difficult to hear Mr. Massey.
How's this, Mr. Landry? Can you hear that?
You still sound very far away, Fred. I don't know why, but
It's right on top of the microphone.
I can't hear anything you just said. So you might want to be aware of that. And if there are other people experiencing the same thing, that are listening, they might want to.
Bill, are you able to hear me better with this microphone?
You're fine, Bob. Fred
Okay,
Massey.
what we'll do is when other people speak,
I'm trying,
Fred.
for a second microphone.
Mr. Chairman, when other people are going to speak, Mr. Landry will give them the portable microphone.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Mr. Rulli, Mr. Massey, members of the commission. For the record, William Landry, I represent the applicant, Last Ever Realty, on this application. And Mr. Rulli has provided a very quick summary of a number of issues that we'll also be covering tonight as part of our application. I think you're all familiar with the site, and I hope most of the people listening are familiar with the site. It's about 16 acres, a little over, on Kennebec, Denver, and Dallas Avenues. There's an existing wetland area on the westerly portion of the site near the reservoir. The edges of that wetland have been verified by DEM, and its locations are identified at on the master plan set, and all of the proposed development will.
Mr. Landry, we can't hear you.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not sure how to solve that. Join the audio. Yeah, I'm not sure how to make it louder.
Try again.
How does that sound? Is that better?
Not good.
Well, I can only tell you, we've had about 3 dozen of these here over the last few months, and there's never been an issue with audio, either from the boards or to the boards. So I'm not sure what the issue is.
The speakers. Give us a minute, Bill.
Try again.
Can you hear me okay right now? You're coming through very, very clearly, the coordinator. That's very clear and crisp.
We should be able to pick up this audio.
I should be able to, yeah. This is on. This is the speaker right here. Try again, Bill?
Can you hear me okay right now?
No, I can hear them fine, but they can't.
Those of us that have computers can hear you. Our expectation was you were going to be here. You could try that.
You might want to try
We're going to
Hold
try
on.
to support it.
someone else other than me to see if other people are having the same issues.
Sue Rabideau, can you hear us?
Hello, I can hear Mr. Landry very well. I can hear Bob Rulli very well. I cannot hear the people in the other people in the council chamber very well.
Were you guys able to hear her just then?
I can hear this person who's speaking right now very well.
It's clearly just coming from your computer.
I don't want to turn up too loud.
Thank
You can't have feedback.
The speakers are on, we're just not picking up. We're not picking up his video.
If I move it up here. This is the speaker right here. Okay, Bill, can you try to speak again?
Yes, can you hear me okay now?
It's not even picking him up on this. Sure. Yeah, try that. Bill?
You're,
Yes,
can you hear us?
I can hear you, Bob, very well, and I can hear the coordinator.
Good. Continue on.
Good, thank you.
Start from the top, Bill.
I don't know if it's turned it down at all.
Start from the beginning.
Is it okay to proceed? I couldn't hear what Mr. Massey just said.
Yeah, you start from the beginning.
Start from the beginning, Bill.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think most of you are familiar with the property. It's a 16-acre site at the confluence of Kinnicut, Denver, and Dallas Avenues. The site is bordered on the west by the reservoir and a wetland area that's been flagged by DEM, and the project site will observe all applicable setbacks from that wetland area. The northern part of the site where the apartment buildings will be located is zoned R40. The southern portion of the site is zoned R10. We're proposing a mixed residential community, a portion of which consists of 12 three-bedroom houses, very consistent in size and lot size with the surrounding area. Those would come up off of Dallas Avenue, just north of Denver Avenue, in the area of the existing 4 lots that were created by the previous subdivision of this parcel. Those are 3-bedroom home ownership dwellings on individual lots. And then to the north, the northern 2/3 or so of the 16 acres will feature 2 apartment buildings, both 54 stories. There'll be a mixture of 1- and 2-bedroom rental units. The majority would be 1-bedroom. At this time, and this isn't in stone, as these things can change as we move through the preliminary and final review stages, but at this time, it's contemplated about 60 of the 108 units would be 1-bedroom, 1-bath units. And the remaining 48 will be 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom units. 25% of the proposed units, both the home ownership units and the apartment units, will be deed restricted to households of low or moderate income housing in accordance with the Low and Moderate Income Housing Act. They'll be integrated throughout the development and not all located in a single area or a single section of the apartment complexes. The proposal has received a letter of eligibility from Rhode Island Housing as required under the Act. There will be a monitoring agent appointed. We have left it up to the board to determine if they have a preference as to who the monitoring agent should be. The role of the monitoring agent is to ensure that the households that reside here are in fact qualified low or moderate income households. And I should mention that unfortunately, the project does not feature low income housing. It's more moderate income housing to persons generally earning at 80% and more of the area median income. It's really workforce housing primarily, but not exclusively for working households. Now, the overarching criteria for approval under the Low and Moderate Income Housing Act are, one, whether the proposal is consistent with an approved affordable housing plan of the town. the affordable housing plan is required to be part of the town's comprehensive plan. And it has to be approved by the Office of Statewide Planning. Yeah, that's the first criteria. The second overarching criteria is that the proposal be consistent with local housing needs in households that have not yet achieved the standard of 10% of their affordable housing stock being available, being occupied by low or moderate income households. Now, the town doesn't have an approved affordable housing plan as part of its comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan itself is out of date and lapsed. So it's one of those proposals that's not guided by an affordable housing plan and does not have the same type of status as where a municipality does have an approved affordable housing plan. However, there was an affordable housing plan approved by the town council back in 2004, shortly before the changes in 2004 to the act that allowed private builders to participate under the Low and Moderate Income Housing Act. And that plan identified certain sites that were particularly suitable for higher density housing that would meet the town's low and moderate income housing needs. And this site was identified as a site among very few others in the town that would be suitable, particularly because it has access to public water and sewer, and because there are so few areas left for development in the town, particularly areas that are not environmentally constrained, like the Tuisset area. So there's a premium in that plan on sites like this that have the carrying capacity to absorb higher density development. I'll also point out, in terms of housing needs and patterns, that the town's housing plan and the comprehensive plan recite that multifamily development is very much part of the housing picture in Warren, much more so than in many or probably even most other municipalities. It accounts for about 50% of the town's housing. We have just a few blocks away the town's largest multifamily development, Kickamuit Village, 153 units surviving well in this part of the community. And it's part of an overall fairly diverse housing configuration in the town of Warren. The plan recites, comprehensive plan recites that Warren is clearly not a single family bedroom community. Rather, it depends heavily on rental apartments as a housing source. The housing plan, such as it is, even though it preceded the 2004 amendments, it had certain goals, strategies, action plans to try to increase affordable housing within the town. One is to look to new multifamily development on vacant land. And that is little vacant land that's suitable within the town. And also to look and to provide at least 10% of the town's year-round housing new units as being available to housings of low and moderate income. Also to create a program of local housing incentives to stimulate production of low and moderate income housing, to change criteria in the zoning ordinance, to permit targeted housing needs, and to permit affordable housing development. And I believe the word targeted should assume sites that are targeted in that affordable housing plan for higher density housing that includes affordable housing. There's a goal to continue to identify sites for the construction of new affordable housing development, to offer density bonuses through zoning relief, to offer internal subsidies as an incentive for building affordable housing. Now, the town's affordable housing progress since 2004 has not been good. And clearly, part of that is because there's so little in the way of suitable sites like this for affordable housing. You know, we're certainly not suggesting that the town has had nefarious motives along the way, but the reality is that there are very, very few sites, if any, like this one that can support these types of densities. So since 2004, the town has really made no progress in increasing its affordable housing stock. Back then, there were 225 low or moderate income housing units within the town. Only 4.6 of the households in the town, well short of the 10% requirement. And the town projected at that time, 15 years ago, that it would have to create 577 new lower moderate income housing units, an average of 18 per year from 2004 to 2020. However, we're almost all the way through 2020, and at last count, the town still had only 226 low and moderate income housing units, only one unit net increase from 2004 when that affordable housing plan was adopted by the town council. The State Housing Resource Commission, in its almost annual rankings of affordable housing progress, has identified Warren as one of only a few municipalities in the state that have made, and I quote, no significant progress toward meeting their affordable housing requirements and needs. Now, the housing needs in the town are extraordinary. More than the statewide planning statistics show that 41% of all households in Warren are cost burdened. And what that means is that they pay more than 30% of their income on housing. 71, almost 72% of all low and moderate income households are what the state describes as heavily cost burdened. And that means that 44.5% of them, 44.5% of them are severely cost burdened, meaning that they pay more than 50% of their income on housing. So 71% cost burdened, 44.5% severely cost burdened, paying more than 50% of their income on housing. So the need is there. And to the extent that the town has conducted formal planning on this, it looked to this site as part of the solution. So there are a few issues that Mr. Rulli touched on very quickly that I'm going to take some testimony by Mr. Principi, our engineer, on. The Low and Moderate Income Housing Act does provide that by the time proposals under the act reach the final approval stage, not the master plan stage, not the preliminary plan stage, which requires another series of public hearings, but by the final plan stage, the project has to demonstrate that there will be no adverse environmental impacts, no significant adverse environmental impacts associated with the project. And at the master plan, there is a conceptual effort to identify the issues that are being worked on. In this case, there are a few of them: the sanitary sewer capacity, the Bristol County Water Authority connection for water, the whole issue of stormwater impacts and lot coverage in proximity to the Kickamuit watershed. These are all issues that the town's engineers and our engineers have been working on and are in agreement, at least as it relates to the Kickamuit watershed issue and the sanitary sewer issue, that master plan stage is too early a stage to really get anyone's arms around environmental impacts that are the subject of intense engineering. The actual design of stormwater systems is important. The actual design of the sewer system is important. Testing of the existing sanitary sewer capacity is important. Those are all very expensive and time-consuming aspects of a development project that take place after the concept approval stage and by the time the final approval stage is concluded. On the sanitary sewer issue, you'll hear our engineer describe the high level of cooperation that they've received from the town engineers in trying to understand the capacity of the existing sewer system, trying to understand how it behaves at peak times, trying to understand the flow capacity of the 15-inch sewer line on Metacom Avenue and what's going on within that line, how they've agreed that a protocol of testing actual flows in that line is essential to understanding this issue, how they've put together a 3-month protocol to evaluate those protocols, how the early signs are that only about 25% of the capacity of that line is being used at this time. And there was a blockage observed that was restricting flow through that line. So one of the things that may come out of this is improved flows through there, but the initial signs are very good in terms of what's going on within that line. Similarly, last week, on Friday, I believe, the Bristol County Water Authority issued through its consultant a confirmation that adequate water service is available for the project, adequate project flows, pressure flows for both domestic water consumption, that is the water consumption of the individuals that will live in this development, as well as fire flow needs. And there was a notation in that letter that sometimes master metering affects those water pressures, and that as part of the future engineering efforts that are underway in this multi-staged process, the master metering issue needs to be figured out a little bit in terms of how that is going to work, how it's going to be designed, and if it's going to have any impact on the domestic or fire flow pressures. We have a traffic analysis done by a qualified, highly experienced traffic engineer. He's here tonight and will be providing some testimony. We're very used to having these traffic engineers. I'm sure the board has seen many, and many of the people listening have seen many, where they do the traffic counts. And by the way, the traffic counts were determined in 2019, pre-COVID, because it would not be a fair thing for us to be measuring traffic right now. It's so much different than it was a year ago. So it was done based on the pre-COVID traffic patterns, very recent, but nevertheless pre-COVID. And they result in, at the end of the day, A and B levels of service at the relevant connections, which are truly outstanding levels of service for traffic in an urban environment, unusual unusually extraordinary levels of service, both before and after the proposed development. And that traffic analysis took into account increased development, build out in the surrounding area as well. So it's a good, solid, very, very positive traffic report. And that traffic report addressed safety analysis and site circulation, and affirmed the suitability of everything, and that there's no danger in terms of a safety analysis. Now, traffic engineering reports like this, most of the time come in at the preliminary plan stage. I shouldn't say most of the time. I should say much of the time come in at the preliminary plan stage when other engineering issues are studied in earnest, but we wanted to get out ahead of that and have it done at the master plan stage. And it's, again, a very strong study. So with that background, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'd like to ask that Tom Principe be recognized and sworn. I believe, I'm not sure if he's there in person or if he's online, but I would like to lead him through a couple of issues associated with the engineering and technical aspects of the project.
Mr. Chairman, before we call Mr. Principe, I just would like to respond to a couple of comments that Mr. Landry made with respect to the affordable housing of the 39 communities, and this is for the benefit of some of the residents that may not be familiar with the statute. The 39 communities in Rhode Island, only 6 communities meet or exceed the 10% requirement for affordable housing. And that's because the calculation is done on deed-restricted units anyways. If we look at our downtown area, the census tract of downtown is designated as low moderate income. Most of that is rental. I'm sure if we did a census of our housing, we would see we're much above the 10%, but for the deed restriction. To be clear, the proposed project would increase the affordable housing inventory in Warren by 0.5%. So it's not a significant increase in terms of what will occur or benefit from this. Unfortunately, both the comprehensive plan and the affordable housing plan are out of date, and those are things we've been working on. Unfortunately, COVID impacted those, but you can't use that as a reason to in any way negatively look at this project. But I do think it's important for people to understand that there is established case law that if in fact there are environmental or engineering concerns that exist today, then they are properly addressed at the master plan stage. That we don't wait to see if we solve these problems further down the road. I want to make it clear that we are, on the same page of understanding that. That's why we've raised them at the master plan stage. If in fact these waivers are not going to be granted, specifically I'm referring to the community watershed overlay district, and you have to redesign the project, we want to give you the opportunity to do that. But that is why we are raising it at this point.
I'd just like to correct Mr. Rulli, who I'll give him some leeway because he's not an attorney, but I think the recitation of the law that was just made is vastly erroneous. There is no case law saying that if there are environmental issues, they have to be addressed at the master plan stage. They have to be addressed by the final plan stage, Mr. Rulli. Thank you.
At each point, Mr. Landry, I'm going to let Attorney DeSisto, the town solicitor, respond to your claim that there is no case law that supports Mr. Ruli's statement about the environmental impacts during the master plan consideration.
And by the way, I know one thing. This matter was set down. Is this on? Do you hear me?
Yes.
No,
Okay.
We had 4.
I'll show. Bill, can you hear me?
Just barely. I can hear you when you speak loudly like you just did, but I couldn't hear a word you said and very little of what Mr. Massey said, and I doubt that anyone else heard it either.
I won't take your name in vain, but I would note one thing. This matter was set down for public hearing. that means the public gets an opportunity to tell the zoning planning board what they feel about this application. We're already at 7:45. Now, I'm gonna answer those questions, but I think it's very unfair that we're having a legal argument at this time, when there's members of the public that are waiting to hear and give their opinions in what they think should happen here on this. So I wanna caution the board on this. I'm gonna answer Mr. Landry, but I don't wanna get into a debate with him, because there's people that are waiting to speak on it. And I don't think it's unfair to the public. Now, that said, I'm looking at a case, Town of Smithfield versus Vicky Development Inc. It is a 2012 Rhode Island Superior Court case that was decided by Judge McGurl. My site is 2012 RI Super Lexus 148, because I use the Lexus search engine. But the CA number is PC 2011-1017. And I would note that the Town of Smithfield at the time was represented by the firm Bishop Avenue. In that case, the boards in Smithfield denied an affordable housing development based upon sewer capacity for that particular piece of property. The matter was appealed to the State Housing Appeals Board, which overturned the town. However, the Superior Court overturned there because they felt there was competent evidence on it. And I just want to caution the board on that. Because, here's the thing, I understand you get to the end and it's whether or not there's environmental impact. But right now you're determining whether or not these broad outlines, as have been set forth, apply here at this. Once you approve master plan, you have all these things. It's incumbent upon the board to determine whether or not this property can carry this amount of units. That's what you're doing here now. This isn't a situation where you take a look at a concept and say, yeah, this is fine, and we'll do the work later. That's not what master plan is for. That's not what this case stands for. So you need to do things now. You need to take a look at this application. You need to make sure that this proposal can fit on this property with all of the constraints that are there. Now, there's a lot of ways. You need to determine whether or not they're appropriate. That is appropriate at the master plan stage. I submit you go forward on it and do your input. Now, I'm sorry that I took as much time as I did. Now it's 7:48. And I don't want to take the public's time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. DeSisto. That will conclude the back and forth between our legal, at least on that matter. But I did think that was important because Mr. Woolley was challenged by the applicant's attorney as to the veracity of the statement. And so we established that in fact is a true statement as reinforced by our attorney. Mr. Principe, if you'd like to come forward.
Yeah, before Mr. Principe presents this, I recognize that there are a lot of people who want to say things. The applicant has some things to say as well, and we're not nearly finished making the presentation, with all due respect. And I want it stated on the record that Bicky case, I'm very, very familiar with it. Our office was involved in that case. That was a situation where the entire sewer system could not accept any more flow. We don't have that situation here. We have an active.
Mr. Lambert, you're not interrupting there.
Mr. Massey, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Mr. Landry, the chair is interrupting you.
Yeah, we have put this matter to rest for now because it's turned into a debate, and that is not the purpose of this meeting. It was simply.
I think I hear what Mr. Massey has said, and I'm fine to put it aside for now, but I don't agree with Mr. DeSisto's characterization, and at the appropriate time, we'll explain why when the chair feels that time is most appropriate. So I'd like to have Mr. Principe sworn, if the board's doing that, commission's doing that these days, and ask him a few questions.
Can I make a suggestion, just that we are able to present For now. Can we come up with a way to present the plan? I think it's more important that the public be able to see if there's a community, because I know we all have copies right at our, I mean, yeah, let's figure out some, yeah, some optimal way that.
Do you want to put it in front of me?
They can present it to as many people as possible.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
And those people that are remote are seeing this.
I think Bob had it on the screen. So I don't know. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Tom Christie.
You can take that off.
Oh, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Tom Christie with Christie Engineering Company. I'm a registered professional engineer here in the state of Rhode Island. And we're the engineer of record for this permit application you have in front of you this evening. Again, Mr. Landry did a pretty well job on describing the project, where it's located, so I don't want to overlap and reiterate a lot of things that were discussed this evening. Mr. Rulli did a great job explaining the waivers and all the council concerns. So what I'm going to do is kind of just skip to the main utilities, the civil engineering part, site design, parking, and whatnot. Once I get through with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board might have. And I'm sure Mr. Landry is going to have expert come right after me. So again, I'd like to just first start again, just summarizing just the main utilities. Again, our main utilities here are sewer, water, and gas. One of the big things I'd like to let the public and the board know, we're in negotiations with National Grid right now, and we're going to be bringing down gas from parts of Connecticut. I think it stops just before Town Street and Connecticut Ave. So National Grid already agreed to run the gas line down and through our property to service our project, and to also provide curb stops and services for other users as well when we're down. The other main utility, again, water, as we heard this evening tonight, we have supply water, Sewer Avenue on the other line. They did multiple flow tests and pressure tests. Our office also did multiple flow and pressure tests for the surrounding area. Again, the initial tests yielded that it was adequate for this development itself. There was a recent flow and pressure test that was witnessed, I believe, by the fire chief. So I'm not sure if the fire chief was present for that or not. But I know he wanted to be present for your last flow test. I believe that was done a couple of weeks ago. I don't have that report in front of me this evening, but that data was submitted to their consultant, which is PAR Engineering. And that was the hydraulic study and the model that was done and updated regarding the fire flows and domestic water demand for our project. So, and they concluded that there was no issues with the water. So, again, the other main utility is sewer. Again, this evening we had some discussions. Mr. Rulli brought up a few points. We have Woodard & Curran, which is the town's consultant, Suez consultant for the sewer. We have been in close communication with Mr. Rulli and Woodard & Curran. We've been going back and forth several times on the sewer infrastructure itself. Last meeting we had was out in the field with Mr. Rulli and Woodard & Curran to do a visual observation of the existing sewer manholes down on Intercom Avenue. Because the big question right now is there's a section, a 200-foot section of sewer line that's 15 inches in diameter. And what we have now is a 24-inch diameter going from a manhole to a 15. So I think it was referred to a bottleneck effect. And again, it would be a bottleneck effect if the flow allowed it to be a bottleneck, not just because of the two lines of different size. That line was upgraded 20, 30 years ago. Don't quote me on the date, but it was done, I believe, in the late 80s. It was upgraded from a 12-inch line to a 24-inch line. So it looks like it's creating that bottleneck effect. Working closely with Woodard & Curran to determine the actual data to see if that section of pipe would either need to be upgraded or we need to do something on site to mitigate those flows. We haven't concluded anything yet. We did the visual observation. We all agreed that if that pipe was flowing full at that time, it was at 10 a.m. Last Thursday or Friday. It was was flowing around 25%. So it was not flowing full and it was not flowing half full. If that makes sense. So again, we're in a dry season, so there's no I&I, and it wasn't during the peak hour. So, but we all agreed that if it was flowing more than half full at that time when it's been so dry, that yes, we have an imminent problem that we need to address right away. So again, we haven't concluded anything. Our next step is to put a flow meter in this 15-inch diameter pipe. There is data from 2008 from Woodard Current, but again, it's old data that we don't want to rely on, and we want to put this flow meter and get this accurate data inside of that 15-inch pipe to determine does that 200-foot section need to be replaced or not. Again, I think we all agree that, yeah, again, we don't have any significant issues with the pump station, this Patterson Street pump station that accepts this wastewater flow from our project and pumps it up Patterson Avenue to a sewer manhole at Manicom Avenue. And there's that section of pipe that's 24-inch diameter that runs into the sewer manhole. Again, it was brought up about also on the sewer, on the depth and the constructability of our site tying into the existing infrastructure. We plan on tying into Denver Avenue with the sewer. It's adequate size diameter pipe, but it's down 10 to 12 feet in depth. So again, this is more of a constructability question, which again, I understand the discussion this evening. We're more than happy to work with the town and the planning board on getting this information to you now. So again, with that said, we're already talking about putting in a secondary sewer line on private property, tying the houses on Denver Avenue, and putting in a drop manhole to kind of reduce the depth of excavation in Denver Avenue. And again, these are construction questions that do come at preliminary and final, just historically speaking. But again, we are thinking about all these issues that, again, the board brought up.
A quick question,
Sure.
Ryder, on this. What is the timeline for the flow meter measurement on that?
So we got a Woodard Current gave us a referral for a company that does this, and we just received a quote, I believe, last week. So what we're doing is we're acquiring a second quote from them the next week. We want a comparison of the two quotes, and then we'll review that with Woodard Current to make sure they accept that vendor and that model number of the flow meter. So I would anticipate the next coming weeks of getting a flow meter in there and monitoring that 15-inch pipe itself.
But then what period of time?
Again, I think Woodard Current can agree, we don't have an answer for that period of time. It could be,
Well,
2 months.
I mean,
it could
around
be 2 to
6
3,
months?
well, we hope it's not 6 months. Again, we're getting into what's called the wet season. Again, it could be 2 or 3 months at best. I mean, John can come and explain to the board his assessment, but I think we agree that.
And that would extend beyond the 120 days that we're currently operating on. Given that, would you be willing to extend without prejudice the period of time before master plan?
So I think we're like applying Mr. Landry on that question.
Mr. Landry, did you hear that?
I did. It wasn't easy to hear, but I did. If it were a short extension, yes, but clearly this information has to come in at some point. Nothing's being approved at this level. It's just master plan. So we would prefer a condition in the master plan approval that that issue be resolved as part of the preliminary plan. If it's going to go more than 2 months. I mean, we may not finish this presentation and hear from all of the members of the public tonight. There may be another meeting. Maybe at that next meeting, the engineers will have a clearer idea as to how long this monitoring has to take place. But it's, I can't tell you right now that it has not been my practice in the past to try to shorten up a planning board's time to deal with something unreasonably. But if there's a genuine interest in understanding what the science has to say about the feasibility of sewer system, of a sewer connection for this project, I, for one, am all for it. you know, if the planning board has already decided that issue, as it seemed like Mr. Rulli had in his introductory remarks, then I don't see the point in waiting for what the engineers think they need to be able to understand this issue.
Again, I think that what we're talking about here is if that flow exceeds the capacity of the pipe, then we'd be talking about potential for significant environmental damage. That is a factor in the consideration of these kinds of proposals. So, you know, and it is a major point within the request for this master plan. That's why, and given the fact that we can't make an accurate flow read within the next 2 weeks or even the next month, it would seem to, it would behoove you, I would believe, to wait until that information was put forward.
Well,
And Mr. DeSisto?
I hate to keep bringing up the Dickey case, but that's what happened. In that matter, the town of Smith offered the applicant the opportunity to present, to make sure that this issue was solidified. And, you know, in that instance, the applicant said no. And that was one of the determining factors in that decision. So what I'd say to Mr. Landry is, of course, we all love Bob, but he doesn't have a vote on the planning board. And the planning board needs necessary, this is the advice of council, the planning board needs sufficient information to make a determination on it at this level. So I think that's where we stand on this matter. And it is something that the applicant has to agree on. And they have to say yes or no. It can't be, well, you know, the planner has made some comments that we don't like. It's either a yes or a no. But this is an offer, I think, that's appropriate for the planning board to make based on cases. And now it's up to the applicant to say yes or no.
Well, I missed the DeSisto. We're about 28 days into the 120 days that the board has to decide this. This thing may well be capable of resolution within the time period that the planning.
Is up on November 13th.
It comes up when?
November 13th.
All right, so it's, you know, we'll probably have another meeting. I mean, I would be inclined if it was within striking distance to grant, but I don't think I should have to decide that tonight, an hour into the very first public informational meeting session on this. You know, again, it's my practice to grant reasonable extensions, but I'm not going to grant tonight, and I don't have my client's authority to grant an open-ended extension to whenever this issue might be sorted out. I think, you know, these guys just met out there on the site last week. They don't even have the monitoring device installed yet. I think it's premature for us to be asked to provide an open-ended extension. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but I'm not going to answer that right now, at least not without talking to my client.
That's fair. Yeah. Okay, moving forward.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to take care of a procedural issue. I was.
Wait a second, can you identify yourself? Can you have a microphone on?
I can, yeah. That's Paul Ryan, I'm the attorney for Safe Vegetable Farm. I needed a continuance for my expert planner on anything. So if the board, you know, so I was gonna ask the public hearing not be closed.
Well,
So,
we do have a public hearing, Mr. Ryan, so we can, I think we'll go through this, but it seems to me that we could offer a continuance, particularly in light of the fact that the flow meter is a significant issue, and according to the advice of our solicitor, it could in fact be a deal breaker if it's not appropriately addressed prior to our ruling on the master plan. So it would seem to me that we want to move forward. Now, that said, I'd like to move forward with the presentation.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I understand what you're asking for, and I think it fits within where we are right now. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, yes. Again, I just want to note, again, just to confirm, again, we've been working diligently with regard on the sewer issue. Once it was brought up in the TRC, that's the first we heard of the 15-inch diameter sewer line. Going through the plan, just on the civil side, with parking, I know it was noted this evening, but again, you do not need a waiver on the parking spaces. You actually have more than what's required, 1.5 parking spaces per family unit. At 100 in total units proposed, 1.5, that's 162 spaces required. We have 186, and that also includes the handicap accessibility and visitor spaces and ancillary spaces as well, built into the whole project itself. One of the things that I'd just like to note too is that we do have proposed sidewalks on one side of the public right of way entering the avenue itself. Again, it's the existing Dallas Avenue. We're looking to improve and widen that per the town specifications in regards to the actual construction of that roadway itself. So again, the only waiver we're asking for on the road construction itself is to eliminate granite curb and install eight-foot berm itself.
Oh, wait a minute, but you're also asking for a waiver of the sidewalks and street trees. So you're asking for several waivers regarding the
One side. So we're gonna have a sidewalk going, have sidewalks on one
one
side.
side, which is
Yeah,
short, and it's not Denver. Correct. And no
It's
street.
the Kinnicket Ave, so going from Kinnicket, if you look at the site plan from Kinnicket down through station 7+60, so about 800 linear feet of sidewalk inside of the development. So, and again, that was on a waiver list, Mr. Chair, for the street trees. And on the updated list, Mr. Landry should have eliminated the street trees. We actually added those back into the overall plan. Even though you don't have a revised set, we haven't produced a revised set yet. But again, the waivers on the street trees, we are taking off. We will be installing the street trees, which should be reflected. Again, we don't have the gentleman who did the landscape plan, submitted that to Mr. Rulli. We have a color rendering of a landscape plan, which gets into the buffers that we're proposing along the north and south sides of the property, which we can discuss briefly. But again, getting back to parking, we meet all the appropriate parking requirements. And again, another big item, I guess, for the civil side of things is drainage and the hydrology. Again, after much discussion, again, I understand there's a few maps and preliminary, the drainage basin that we're proposing on the site, again, just from a hydraulic standpoint of view, is split. A majority of the runoff goes to the west towards the delineated wetland system. And we will be having a detention basin that will pick up most of the runoff from the roof. And I'll get into the parking areas in a second. And then there will be an infiltration basin in the front of the property, on Kinnicket Avenue, which will take a small portion of the site, just again, due to the existing topography. Only a small portion of the site drains east towards Kinnicket Avenue. So it wouldn't require a large basin there. And again, just the difference between infiltration and detention, we have infiltration in the front. And again, Mr. Rulli asked about the results of the soil testing, which we can include in the report. The material is very sandy, gravelly, very porous material, and water table is very well drained in the front of the property. So that's why we chose the infiltration basin in the front of the property itself. Regarding drainage and infiltration, it was noted about the lot coverage waiver that we were asking for. Again, speaking with the client, we're just working with everybody on the requests. Some of the things that we can do and that we're amenable to, and the applicant is on board with this. And what we've done in the past is design a porous pavement asphalt on the parking areas. We do have a substantial amount of parking pavement. It's over 80,000 square feet. So again, think about it, we have over 2 acres of asphalt parking areas. Again, just to accommodate these buildings. So again, one way to decrease and obviously improve our water quality, decrease runoff, and be more compliant with the lot coverage requirements, we can design a porous asphalt system, which would be reviewed by the DEM, which I can get into in a second.
Are you still asking though for the waiver of the island for each 8 parking spaces?
Mr. Chair, we are still asking for that waiver, yes. So with that said, Mr. Chair, again, on the next step, so permitting wise and level of detail, we can't contest that in preliminary. We go to DEM at preliminary, we don't go to DEM at master plan, just because they need a letter from the town itself. So, and I think that's where the discussion is. But at preliminary itself is where the hard engineering comes into place and the actual permits. The DEM, we're going to require a DEM review permit for stormwater and water quality itself. So DEM has a strict stormwater design manual that analyzes all the pollutants and the stormwater runoff volume itself. So once we finalize what we're doing and we design it, we'll send up the final hydrology report and the final design to DEM, and they go through a complete review, which also requires the test holes. But again, just being a good engineer, we already did the test holes from day one before it starts to see what we're working with. We reviewed the wetlands, had them verified to see what we're left with. Again, do the survey, figure out the perimeter, so sewer, water, gas, figure out all the major topics, which again is a big concern for the town and development like this. So I completely understand the town's view on wanting some more of this. You know, again, preliminary is preliminary, but again, wanting a little bit more from what we usually do at master. But I completely get that, Mr. Chair. So again, with that said, of course, David, we're going to utilize on this plan itself, which would take out the requirement. Because again, it's so much liters of asphalt.
We would need some kind of management plan.
Correct, that's correct, yes, and that would be recorded in the deed, that we require management, yes. And DEM would require, again, when we get to DEM, they're gonna have a laundry list of items for us to submit and requirements from the contractor, and there's a bunch of different operating documents. And also, DEM also requires a pre-construction, prior to anybody starting, DEM and the site contractor have to meet on site and go through all of those checklist items to make sure the stormwater and water quality itself is properly maintained through construction. Then we have a soil erosion sedimentation control plan, similar to what Warren has. When we submit for these single family developments, Warren has that erosion control ordinance, which also requires drainage. So again, that's small scale, but this is large scale. So the state also piggybacks on that, but also has a bunch of additional set of criteria to follow as well. And that's it. I think that will conclude, again, my end of the overall presentation. Unless, Mr. Rulli, would you like me to, again, we didn't do the landscape plan, I don't know if you want to bring it up on the screen. I can answer,
We
try
have
to
it.
answer any
We
questions.
have it up on the screen. I mean, I would call that a preliminary landscape plan.
Correct,
There's not a
yes.
lot of detail there.
Yep.
It's a color picture.
Yep.
I don't think it's necessary to get into too much detail on that right now.
Any questions?
Any questions from the board?
Yeah, I actually have one question. Is on that.
Yes.
Just one quick question about the plans. I know it's all preliminary, we don't have that in front of us, but I just wanted to quickly ask about the road vegetation or something that might be existing that we're running there along the street. So buffering to the neighbors, if there's anything proposed.
Sure. Again, existing vegetation, a majority of the lots cleared. And the thicker vegetation, there's a vegetation line, but it's about 100 feet off easterly of the wetland line. So the westerly side of the parcel has more of the thicker vegetation, but a majority of the lot has been cleared over time. And what you have is more of your smaller scrub brush and taller grasses. There's really nothing. It's almost barren.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I'm asking about proposed plantings between this property development and.
Sure.
residential.
Sure. So getting into that, we are proposing a 20-foot wide landscape buffer to the north of the property. Also along Kinnicket Avenue, shown on the plan, we have a 20-foot wide landscape buffer buffer along the entire north section and along Kinnicket Avenue on the easterly side of the parcel. Another buffer, which again, usually is required, but again, working with the applicant on trying to get some sort of a visual screen here, is in between the single-family dwellings on Denver Avenue. Those buildings are going to be staggered, number one, but number two, in the backyard of the single family on Denver Avenue, we also have a proposed 10-foot wide landscape buffer that's going to run east to west the entire depth of the project itself, to provide further visual landscape. And again, like Mr. Rulli said, there's a concept landscape plan that should identify that. Again, we can do other plantings and go over that as well.
One other element, the 4 houses from the original subdivision that was proposed, are those going to be included in the overall development, or are they being treated as a separate entity?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I believe so. I have to just confirm with Mr. Landry on that.
Bill, were you able to hear the question?
Yeah, I have heard it. They are shown as existing in our plans. We're not proposing to change them. If you want us to include them, we can talk to our client about it. I'm not sure what the advantage or disadvantage of that is. The other,
To including those, Mr. Landry, would be that one of those would be would count for affordable housing. Otherwise, they don't. So it's a significant factor in the overall plan. You know, we were brought the 4 houses at one point, given assurances about how those would be treated for future development. It didn't work out that way, but if they're part and parcel of this larger development, then that would have to be considered as part of the affordable housing.
well, that's something we could consider. I don't know that anybody committed to do anything in particular as part of the rest of the land here that could be developed. But if that's an important issue to the board, to have one of those 4 units be affordable, that's certainly something I will confer with my client on. Doesn't seem to me to be unreasonable.
One of the conditions for approval for those 4 lots was that any further development on the remaining land would require the consent of those property owners.
Well, the property owners are my client, Mr. Rulli, so that's not going to be a hard thing to do.
I understand that, but I think Mr. Max's point is, I'm not speaking for him, is that that was not what was represented to the planning board when they approved those lots previously.
Well, I doubt that anybody represented that the rest of the project would remain undeveloped.
No, it was that anybody who bought in there would have a say in what was going to appear there. So again, they weren't sold, but you know, now we've got a different situation. You're also asking for a waiver of that, of the request regarding that. So you have acknowledged the fact that those 4 houses were part of this decision-making process, and you're asking for a waiver on it. So I'm saying, you know, you can't have it both ways. You can't ask for a waiver of something that you're admitting exists and then say it didn't exist or it doesn't exist.
Yeah, we don't need that waiver. We withdraw it. It doesn't, there's nobody that bought in this development thinking that anything in particular was going to happen here.
And you still have a waiver in there, so we'll take that out, I guess.
Well, we can take it right out. Yeah, and we'll think about those 4 units, and I'm not sure why they would have any bearing on this, but that's certainly something we'll take into consideration together with everything else.
There's number 10 on the requested waivers, just for your information. You didn't make it up. You brought it up. All right, we'll move forward. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Landry,
Mr. Gephardt?
So I would suggest that since a lot of these waivers are under reconsideration, assuming we continue the meeting, at the next meeting, you sort of a revised list of the waivers that are requested, so we know exactly what is and what is not being requested. the sidewalks, the trees, things like that. I think you have to be very clear about what's being requested and what is not being requested.
Thank you, Mr. Gephardt. That concludes yours, Mr. Christie. Did you have the traffic study you want to?
So I think I can invite Mr. Brayton from Ryan Associates, Bill Landry, is that right? Is that what you expect?
I can't hear whoever's speaking.
Sorry.
Tom was asking if you'd like the traffic consultant to testify next.
No, I'm not quite finished with Mr. Principe yet, though, but thank you.
Floor is yours, Mr. Landry.
Thank you. Mr. Principe, a couple of questions on the sewer issue. Am I correct that at a preliminary review committee meeting a couple of weeks ago, I think it was September 9th, that was attended by yourself and the town's engineers, that this initiative of having flow testing of this line on Metacom Avenue was mutually agreed to? It was known that it would likely take a period of months, and it was determined that that would be the best way of determining the feasibility of the proposed sewer connection. Am I recalling that correctly?
So yeah, again, Bill, just to elaborate on that, flow testing wasn't determined right away. The data was provided to us to evaluate, to review, and then to discuss that with Woodard and Curran. So again, the flow metering, I'm not sure at what point we decided that it would be a good idea, but again, maybe a month ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, it was decided, I think, between both parties, myself and Woodard and Curran, that would be the best course of action.
Well, I mean, it was recommended by the town of Woodward Kern that that was an option for you, because based on the data that Woodward Kern had provided, our determination was that that pipe was at capacity and that your flow information was going to put it over capacity. It's not something we asked to have done. We offered that as an option to you, which goes to my point earlier as to what the existing conditions are.
Yeah, and it was a good option, and the engineers are executing that plan. So if I understand it correctly, Mr. Principe, that the Woodard and Curran folks, the town's engineering consultants, to your knowledge, have not concluded that a sewer connection to this project is infeasible at this stage of review, correct?
That's correct.
And you have not determined that either, correct?
Correct.
Now, is there a backup engineering solution that's feasible and workable in the event that it's determined that there's some limitation of that sewer line that cannot be managed without extraordinary expense?
Yes, there's been discussed in-house regarding some solutions, but none of that discussed with Woodard and Curran. But to answer your question, yes, there is a solution.
And what is that? Does that involve?
I think at this point, Mr. Landry, you're having a discussion with your client at a public hearing. This is something that I'd rather you handle off-site regarding an engineering solution to a problem.
Oh, no. No, Mr. Principe's about to describe the engineering methods that can be employed to deal with the fact that the city's sewer system right now, or if it turns out that there's a limitation in that line, that the sewer flow could be retained on site and introduced incrementally. And I'm just asking him to explain from an engineering perspective what that alternative feasible methodology is.
Mr. Principe has already presented that as a possibility.
I can't hear you, Mr. Massey, I'm sorry.
I have to ask, is this something that's going to be submitted into the record?
Yes, this should be on the record. This is our testimony of our engineer about the feasibility of connection with the sewer, highly relevant, and I would hope not to be excluded from introducing this testimony.
I beg your pardon, and I'm sorry that I'm interrupting, because now we're at 8:25 on a meeting that was billed as a public hearing, so the public waiting now for an hour and a half. We're just through one witness. But here's my question, okay? And I understand that you've been discussing something. My question is that alternative in the record tonight for the public so that they can speak and discuss it? Is it?
Yeah, it is if you'll allow Mr. Principe to answer my question.
So again, I understand the back and forth with Mr. Chair and Mr. Landry is system. There's been discussion in-house. Again, anything we dealt with engineering standpoint. We haven't decided to include anything because we don't have the answer yet. We don't know if it can support it yet. We don't have that data. So that's why we haven't told you. There's discussion in-house about possible solutions. So from an engineering standpoint of view, we can engineer anything. I mean, we've done some substantial size projects, small, medium, and large. So it's just a question, all due respect, if we need to upgrade that line or not, or is there something we can do on the site to mitigate those peak flows? But again, there's been any discussion about that, or nothing, for the record, and to submit, we don't have anything, we don't have that conclusion.
Understood. And thank you. You answered my question. Thank you very much. So in other words, the fellow that we have right there with the elaborate mask, town's engineer, he hasn't seen anything with this alternative.
I have not seen anything.
All right, so.
And also, I wanted to just add that.
That has to be, we can't really get into this. First time I've heard of it too.
They're not using
We
it.
haven't included anything.
Right, so we don't have a conclusion, so we can't come in with anything.
If you need it back, we'll get it.
definitive at this point, which seems to be what Mr. Landry's asking for. I would then say, let's move along.
Mr. Chairman, I just would like to add that Woodward and Curran's report, which has been submitted, concluded that that pipe is insufficient at this time. There was no agreement that we're going to continue to look at it. I mean, their conclusion was that they could not handle the additional flow that's coming from this project. I think it's important to reiterate that.
This is really, just clarification, was that the 2008 report that concluded, or the?
Yeah, so we have Woodward and Curran.
John Dimlin, Woodward and Curran.
So what I would say has transpired is that we did an evaluation at that first PRC meeting. Mr. Rulli represented that 15-inch pipe didn't have no capacity. We had a follow-up conversation about supplying Woodward, providing Principe with data to support our conclusion that there wasn't enough flow in that pipe. We provided that data, we made a determination. I also don't exactly remember the timing of it, but what I remember being decided was we were going to come up, that Principe was going to come up with a plan for flow metering as an alternate to using the methodology that we're currently. So I don't feel that we've seen what that flow metering plan is. We did meet on Thursday. We discussed the location. I think what's really important here is what is the timeline. I don't think we've established what that plan is. So I just wanted to make that point. Because I think it's going to be more than a few months.
And I guess to elaborate on that is the report concluded with the assumptions, I think it's the assumptions based on a dry season. Again, this isn't a TRC, so I don't want to get too technical, but this is the reason why we're just discussing this in more detail. If there needs to be a replacement or an upgrade, that'll be done once it's determined by both parties.
Because I thought I heard something said that we're in current agreed that there was, I forget how it was put, but that we agreed with the flow metering as the solution.
Not solution, I'm
We
sorry.
don't need a plan.
I wrote it down. What Mr. Amanda said was that the town had agreed with their engineers that the flow meter did not arise, that it could be conditional upon a master plan. That was not ever a decision. We didn't say we would approve the master plan and then accept some flow meter data after that acceptance. That was not, in fact, how that meeting went. We said the flow meter is going to be looked at, and that was how we left it, which is exactly what we said. So there was no agreement on any timing or installation because we didn't even know what we were talking about at that point. Actually, I'd like to move this forward if we could to the public hearing side. Folks have waited. We've had quite a bit of presentation and testimony. The traffic study, I know that has been done. Mr. Wooley had a concern about that, but I would like to, open this to the public at this point.
I believe, I'm sorry to interrupt, I believe our traffic engineer just like to just review real quick.
If you could do
Usually
it,
we do that real.
right, if you were really quick,
You don't
that
mind. Oh, yeah.
if you can identify yourself, please. you can come up. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening. I'll make this quick. So we did the traffic study, and I have not heard actually directly any concerns from the police department, so I can't address those. But we did a typical traffic study based on industry standards, looking at how much traffic would be generated by the development, adding to the existing traffic, coming up with the levels of service, to quantify how well the traffic would operate with the development as proposed. And our conclusion was that there would be acceptable or excellent levels of service at all the intersections we looked at. And there would be no change in level of service at the existing intersections. As mentioned earlier, we did look at safety, we look at sight distance at the intersections, especially Connecticut at the what's called Dallas Avenue, Wolf Driveway, and there's sufficient sight distance at that location. So to summarize quickly, there are no concerns with from a traffic viewpoint for this development.
And that was based on varying times, for example, mornings, afternoons, evenings.
That's right. We looked at the peak hours in the morning, typically the morning commuter, and afternoon, typically between 7 to 9 in the morning, 4 to 6 in the afternoon. Yes. And again, pre-COVID, when traffic was what was every time normal. Yeah.
Mr. Brady, would you just state your name and address for the record?
Yes, Tom Brayton, Brian Associates,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry to rush you.
No.
We're opening this up to the public. Do we have a list up in terms of who's speaking first or who is?
There were members of the public asked to be here. Not all of them asked to speak. I believe Ms. Ramos is maybe speaking for the Save Betancourt Farm
If you
folks.
can come up and you'll identify yourself with your address before you speak.
My name is Karen Linas. I live at 19 Camden Avenue. I have several concerns. Let me first say that I am not opposed to affordable housing. If this was a development like the one on Washington Street in Barrington where there's townhouses, I would have no problem with that. But you're talking about putting 2 4-story apartment buildings in the residential neighborhood with children. They keep going to the Kicking Village complex and telling us that that's the same situation. The road that accesses that complex is 2.5 times the width of Kinnick Avenue. It empties out onto a 4-lane medical avenue. So it is not the same as what they're proposing. There is land in this town for other development. There's a beautiful piece of land right on Market Street for sale right now. That could be wonderful for the housing. So I don't believe that this is the only piece of land for this type of a project. The size and scope of this project does not fit here. Again, you had 20 house lots, you're turning into 110 apartments, 108 apartments, and 12 house lots. You're taking that piece of land and you're changing the capacity by 4 times what its initial zoning was. I think that's extreme. I feel that's very extreme for the area. There's ledge on that land, and most of the people that live on Denver Avenue have wells. What guarantee do we have that those wells will be destroyed and you lapse that ledge? That's another question I have. Everyone has addressed the environmental aspects and that type of stuff, but those are the things that I have serious concerns about. I just don't think that this project fits in this area. And I am not against townhouses or any kind of affordable houses, smaller houses. I don't have a problem. But what this is, it doesn't work in my opinion at all. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else from the public that's here that would like to speak?
I would suggest, ma'am, I'd suggest that you put your comments also into writing and send them to Mr. Wood so that we have a very clear.
One more question. I had one more question I just brought up. Is there's going to be detention ponds on this property. And this last ever real estate corporation was started at the beginning of this project. When this project is over, it will dissolve and there will be the last ever do. They have absolutely no website presence whatsoever. So when all of these detention ponds need maintenance, and if they put a holding tank and then a pump station, who's gonna end up with the responsibility of all of that stuff? Is the town gonna end up paying for detention pond maintenance and pump station maintenance? Or is this gonna be deeded into the property so that whoever owns this property has to maintain
Yeah,
it?
we have a means by which those pension funds are regularly maintained, not through the town, but through the developer or whoever that is. Yeah.
But that moves with the property, so if they sell off this property after they
Yes,
develop it,
that is,
that was the. Thank you.
do we have anybody else from the public?
Yes. I'm following Tom's drawing.
You could identify yourself and name and address, please.
I don't know if you heard.
My name is Paul Raza. I live at 17 Denver. Everyone's concerned gas is on track. And you brought up the 4 lot, original lots with the decision. The one decision you missed was that originally, no building could go on beyond the trees on the lot because it infringed on the DEM zone. I measured that zone out, and it comes up to here. And we also want assurances when they start blasting, because the sewer is down 26 feet, not 12. That they're gonna repair wells or walls as they did when they first put the sewer lines in a timely manner. So right now, as far as I'm concerned, and also Denver Avenue with all this extra traffic and from the apartments, this road is 16 and a half feet wide. Substandard just for us alone. It's hard for us to park in front of our house. What's gonna happen with all this traffic? Are they gonna cut back these lots, which now makes them less than 10,000 square feet? That's something else you've got to consider. But right now, that's all I got to say on that. They cannot infringe on this wetland. They've been told that in their review decision on those 4 lots. And I want that out, and that road is right through the biggest hole on the entire piece of property, which has to be blasted. So I'd like to know what they plan on doing with that. Because like I said, if you park in front of your house, a fire engine couldn't get past it. Never mind with 16 new houses, and they only ask for 12. Now it's 16. So I'd like an honest answer from this guy or something. That's it.
Thank you. Any other,
Just, Chairman, I just want to see if anyone on the Zoom portion of the meeting has a question. If you do, on the bottom of your screen, there is a raise your hand icon, or in the participants, if a member of the public that is participating via Zoom have a question or a comment, now would be the time to indicate that. No, I am not seeing any.
okay, there's a gentleman here.
Yes, I believe it.
I asked you to identify yourself, address.
Yes, my name is David Oliveira, I'm 75 Schoolhouse Road, Warren. My concern, again, I'm not a traffic engineer, but I think anyone who drives down St. Road understands that it barely is 2 cars wide. I walk it pretty much every morning, and if I'm walking along the road, this morning it happened, I'm walking alongside the road, there are no sidewalks. And the car coming up behind us, I could hear it, there's a car coming, they had to stop to let the other car through. These are normal, everyday sedans, these aren't very big trucks. So how the impact of adding all of this activity, and we're being told that the streets can handle that, I find that, again, I'm not an engineer, but I find it very hard to believe from just practical common sense and being in the neighborhood. And for what it's worth, I think, again, if you did a survey of people and asked if we take these 2 enormous buildings and dump them in the residential area, that barely, there are homes there that go from a single level, and all of a sudden, in the middle of this beautiful oasis that we have here in Warren, we dump these 2 humongous buildings there, it just does not fit the neighborhood. And I think it creates a dangerous template for the town of Warren, because now the next developers will let this one ride, templates there to do it over and over again in this town. And I agree with other folks, Karen spoke, to say there are other parts of town that maybe this would be a better fit, but I just don't agree that that works in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Donna Raza, I live at 17 Denver Avenue, and I agree with what David just said about the traffic. I walk along Kennecott quite a bit with my granddaughters, taking them for walks. I was run off the road, the baby carriage a few weeks ago, the car trying to go by. They actually turned around and came back and apologized. They said that there was no room and they didn't see me. I also think you need to look at certain times if you're looking at a traffic study. My daughter just purchased property there. And she's called the police department several times because of the high amount of traffic, and that road is going to get traffic from this project too, because it's right on the other side. So if there's a traffic study, they need to look at certain times along with Kennecott.
Thank you. Mr. Ryan, Attorney Ryan, could you give me a sense of,
Mr. Chair, when Mr. Ryan is done, there is one member of the public that would like to speak via Zoom, but Mr. Ryan can speak first.
yeah, I wanted him to explain, you indicated that you have a witness.
I have a planner, Michael Cassidy, hired planner from the city of Pawtucket. And quite honestly, Michael and I are the same age. And one thing that is done with COVID, we have difficulty looking at small versions and big plans. So we haven't been able to look at all the plans related to this. In addition to that, the number of waivers is a little bit overwhelming for us to try to figure out in a short space of time. They'll be ready within a week. It's just that he had to go visit the planner to look at the big plans and then prepare his testimony. I can prepare it both in, have them prepare it in writing and then have them available for questions.
Okay, thank you.
The last thing though, I was engaged by one of the 3 towns, I won't name which, to try to straighten out the issue of the status of those reservoirs. The statute was originally the Coast State Pipeline statute, sponsored by George Carulla. So I haven't done that yet, but I'll try to do that. So everybody, Mr. Landry, Mr. Sisto, everybody gets a sense of what the actual status is, because there's definite confusion between the water authority, some of the towns, some of the people who are riparian rights out there. So I think they're pretty clear on the statute, but I'll try to get that to everyone as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There was
We're going to unmute. What do you do?
I got it.
Yeah. Sam, you just identify yourself, your name and address, please?
My name is Sam Pinero. I live at 5 Detroit Avenue.
Thank you.
I am just kind of concerned we went from a first proposal of some houses being down there to this monstrosity, which does not in any way go with our neighborhood of a 4-story apartment complex. I have many concerns. Traffic is one of them. Also, what kind of stress this is going to put on the town as far as emergency services and whatnot are required. I also believe that we don't need to just build housing. There is housing available that can be done with. We don't just need to build dedicated areas for this kind of housing. My concerns is, this does not go along with the theme of the neighborhood in any way, shape, or form, besides maybe a few houses down there. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. That's it from the public.
Well, no, they've already, you have your. Excuse me? You've already provided testimony.
I just want to ask a question about the flow down. Do they do it in one day or do they do it over an average of a
No,
week?
it's over a long period of time. We don't know. That's one of the unknowns here. Given where we are right now, it seems to me that a decision on this matter would be premature, unless the applicant is unwilling to come back and talk about a continuance.
Let me make a suggestion here. Bob has said that the deadline for your making decision on the 128 is what day?
November 13th.
November 13th. I recommend the public hearing remain open and the matter be continued to your October meeting. That would allow for perhaps some additional information from Mr. Prinsky. I don't know if that's a possibility, but certainly by that time, Mr. Ryan should be able to present his memorandum as to the legal status of the reservoir, as well as having his planner testify on this thing. And with that information, the public hearing can be closed and the decision made at that time. If that's acceptable to the board.
Well, again, I asked.
Mr. Landry, were you able to hear
Let
that?
me make a motion that we continue this matter on the public hearing for our regular.
I just want to make sure Mr. Landry heard. Mr. Landry, were you able to hear Mr. DeSisto's comments?
Yeah, I thought it made sense. I didn't catch whether he was suggesting it be continued to the 13th or to the planning board's November meeting or whatever. I wasn't quite sure I got the date, but
Continue to the regularly scheduled October meeting of the planning board.
oh, the regularly scheduled October meeting.
Right.
Okay.
Fourth Monday.
Well, that's certainly fine with us.
Given that, Mr. Gephardt, you have made a motion.
I move that we continue this matter to the regularly scheduled October meeting, including keeping the public hearing open, and that Mr. Landry and Mr. DeSisto discuss a possible extension that could be presented at that time.
Mr. Gerhart made a motion to continue the public hearing, Mr. Landry, until the October planning board meeting, and also the potential for you and Mr. DeSisto of recommendation that possibly there could be an extension if you weren't able to hear.
Okay, that sounds fine. Thank you.
Okay, do you have a second?
Mr. Patterson seconded the motion.
All in favor, raise your hand.
It was unanimously approved to continue the meeting, Mr. Landry.
Okay. In October.
I have a couple of questions. Just about procedure. I just want to know I'm just curious for the traffic study that came in, the feasibility report that came in, does that get reviewed, just to plan how that is reviewed by town consultants?
We think it's premature to have a traffic consultant brought in at this point. In terms of the hydrology, either Fuss and O'Neill or Woodward, I'm not sure which, will review that. We just got it.
Okay. I guess my recommendation would be that we try to have as much of kind of that technical design elements worked out with our consultants, the PRC, kind of have that summarized well for us as a board. I mean, I think what we did tonight was great, but I wanted to kind of stick to the meat of what we need to review next month. So as much as that in design, technical design, that we can be, you know, summarized for us. I know that you may think that's just really my.
I'm not gonna get my big report, but I have a question on that. When you talk about design, there's no way
I guess what I'm saying is if we have a bunch of new information that isn't given to us still the night of that meeting presented to us as the board, is that hard for us as a board, when we have a preliminary review already formed that could perhaps use some of that. We have some consultants already on hand. So I think if there's anything that might get reviewed, we should just make sure that gets done before October, for things that we already have.
well, we'll make sure it's that level that
Yeah,
happens.
that's
So
right.
it's not a thing, here it is tonight, take a look at it. I agree.
I mean, I would ask, I mean, for, you know, despite Bristol County Water's flow projections, the fire chief is still in need to know what type of building type it is, what the square footage of those buildings are, and what the distance between the two buildings are, so he can make a determination whether or not there's adequate fire protection. So if that information could be provided in advance of the meeting, it would be helpful.
So I agree with Jane. Essentially, the memo that we got had a lot of notations of missing material. And I think it would be helpful if in fact that the preliminary review committee could get all of those requested pieces of information, and would be most helpful if they could actually provide us a recommendation on where to work.
I think that
They're
the
not-
point is
they're
really
not being
that under
here.
the planning board.
Yeah, the preliminary review committee's done.
I would expect that that information would be forthcoming. I think there are a couple of major points, the flow meter and the possibility of continuation without prejudice. The number of the 4 houses and the associated waiver of those relative to, and I would strongly recommend that they be included in the entire project as a whole, as opposed to 2 separate items, because it does raise the specter of awkwardness at the very least. Those are the 2 factors that we want to particularly pay attention to and have well in hand. So I would expect that, Mr. Landry, you have the opportunity to Principally and to your client prior to the meeting and to review all of the waivers and determine which ones are maintained and which are not. Thank you.
Good idea. So from the point of view of the 4 extra houses, it seems to me that that affects both the flow analysis of the sewer and the traffic, so that they certainly should be included in the final calculations.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, have minutes, but not to,
Yeah, I think you, at this point, is a motion to adjourn.
okay, I'd like a motion to adjourn. So moved, Jim Patterson, second.
Second.
Baron, all in favor, raise your hands. Thank you very much.